On the last Saturday of August 1987, the Clayton County Fair was having its best year in a decade. The grandstands were packed for the tractor pull. Over 2,000 people, families with kids on their shoulders, teenagers eating corn dogs, old farmers in seed caps analyzing every machine that rolled onto the track. The tractor pull was the main event. It always had been, going back to the 1940s when farmers would hitch their work machines to weighted sleds and see who could pull the farthest. Back then, it had been a test of skill as much as horsepower, knowing when to shift, how to manage traction, when to back off before you burn the clutch. Those days were gone by 1987, and one man was the reason. Let me tell you about Rick Holloway, because you need to understand him before you can understand what happened that afternoon. Rick was 45 years old and had owned Holloway Farm Equipment, the John Deere dealership in Elkader, for 15 years. He had inherited it from his father, who had built the business from nothing. But where his father had been a mechanic who knew every bolt in every tractor he sold, Rick was a salesman who knew every financing trick in the book. He had a gift for making farmers feel like they needed equipment they couldn't afford. For convincing them that last year's model was already obsolete, that new technology would pay for itself, that debt was just another word for investment. He was also, in the way of men who have never worked with their hands, contemptuous of anyone who didn't embrace the newest and the best. Old equipment wasn't just outdated to Rick. It was embarrassing, a sign of failure. The tractor pull had become Rick's annual showcase. For 3 years running, he had brought the dealership's demonstration tractor to the competition, not to test it, not to learn anything, but to win. To stand in front of the whole county and prove that his machines were the best. In 1984, a John Deere 4440, first place. In 1985, a 4640, first place. In 1986, a 4840, first place by the length of the track. Nobody could touch him. The local farmers brought their working machines, tractors they had paid off over years, maintained themselves, run for 10 or 15 seasons. Rick brought whatever was newest on his lot, fresh from the factory. It wasn't really a competition. It was a demonstration of who had money and who didn't. But 1987 was going to be different. Rick had something special planned. Let me tell you about the John Deere 4850, because it was the most advanced farm tractor anyone in Clayton County had ever seen. The 4850 was John Deere's flagship model, 200 horsepower with more electronics than most farmers' houses, computerized fuel injection, digital readouts for everything, an automatic load sensing system, and something brand new for 1987, a traction management computer. If the wheels started to slip, the computer reduced power to prevent damage. If the engine ran hot, it dialed back performance. If any sensor detected a problem, the system went into protection mode. The engineers called it progress, the salesmen called it foolproof, Rick called it his ticket to permanent dominance. He had ordered the 4850 in March specifically for the August fair, $82,000 more than most farms in the county were worth. On the morning of the fair, Rick drove it slowly through the midway so everyone could see it. Green and yellow paint so bright it hurt to look at. Air-conditioned cab, leather-wrapped steering wheel, it looked like it had just rolled out of a showroom. Because it had. By 5 in the afternoon, the heavyweight class was underway, open to any farm tractor over 150 horsepower. 6 local farmers had entered with their working machines. John Deere 4430s and 4440s, an international harvester, a Massey Ferguson, good machines, honest machines. The best of them, Dale Henderson with his 1979 4440, made it 287 feet. Then Rick climbed into the 4850, the crowd went quiet. The flag dropped, the 4850 lunged forward, 300 feet, 360, 380, 400, 406 feet. The sled finally stopped it, the longest pull in Clayton County Fair history. Rick climbed down and took the microphone. 406 feet, he said, grinning at the grandstands. That's technology, folks. That's what happens when you invest in the best. Now, I know some of you out there are running antiques, running machines your grandfathers bought. That's fine for a museum. But this is a competition. This is the modern age. Does anyone out there honestly think they can match what this machine just did? He waited, nobody moved. That's what I thought. See you next year. Maybe by then some of you will have upgraded to real tractors. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The old-timers were shaking their heads. The farmers who had competed looked at the ground. Then a pickup truck pulled into the fairground. Let me tell you about Howard Pickkins, because he is the reason this story is still being told. Howard was 63 years old and had farmed 280 acres in the northeast corner of Clayton County for 40 years. He had taken over from his father in 1947 and had been working the same ground ever since. Howard was not a man who talked much. He went to church on Sundays, nodded to his neighbors at the feed store, paid his bills on time. He had been widowed in 1975 and had lived alone since. He didn't owe money to anyone. He didn't buy new equipment unless the old couldn't be repaired. And in his barn, under a canvas tarp that hadn't been lifted in nearly a decade, sat a 1950 Oliver 88. Let me tell you about that tractor. The Oliver 88 was a row crop machine built in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Not the biggest Oliver made, not the most powerful, but solid, reliable, built in an era when tractors were expected to outlast the men who bought them. Howard's father, Earl Pickkins, had purchased this Oliver new in 1950. He walked into the implement dealer in Elkader, the same building that was now Rick Holloway's John Deere dealership, and paid cash, $2,800, everything he had saved from 4 good years. "This tractor will outlast both of us," Earl had told his son. "You take care of it and it'll take care of you." Earl farmed with that Oliver until 1970 when his health failed and Howard took over. By then the machine was 20 years old but ran as smoothly as the day Earl had driven it home. Howard finally retired it in 1978 when he bought a used John Deere 4020 for heavier work, but he couldn't sell his father's tractor. He parked it in the back of the barn, covered it, and left it there. 9 years under a tarp. He hadn't started it once. But he had never forgotten what it could do. That morning, Howard had pulled back the tarp for the first time since 1978, checked the fluids, primed the carburetor, turned the key. The Oliver coughed twice, rattled once, and started. Now his truck came slowly down the gravel road, towing a flatbed trailer. On the trailer, strapped with chains, was something that made the crowd turn and stare. Visibly, unmistakably old, faded green paint worn to bare metal in places, exhaust pipe held on with baling wire, tires cracked with age but still holding air, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the stack. "What the hell is that?" someone said. "That's an Oliver," an old-timer answered. "An 88, haven't seen one running in 20 years. Howard backed the trailer to the edge of the track and unhitched the chains, steady, methodical, unhurried. Rick reached for the microphone. "Somebody call the museum," he said, loud enough for the whole grandstand. "They're missing an exhibit." The crowd laughed unevenly. "Hey, old-timer," Rick called out. "You know this is a tractor pull, right? Not a parade of relics. That thing looks like it belongs in a junkyard." Howard didn't respond. He climbed onto the Oliver and started the engine. It caught with a cough, then settled into a steady rumble, not smooth like the 4850, rougher, more like a living thing than a machine. "You can't be serious," Rick said. "You want to enter that against my 4850. Howard looked at Rick for the first time. "I want to pull, that's what this competition is for. That thing won't make 10 feet, you'll embarrass yourself in front of the whole county." "Then it won't take long." The crowd had gone quiet. The announcer looked from one man to the other. "Rules say any tractor over 50 horsepower can enter the heavyweight class," Howard said. "This Oliver is rated at 55, I paid my entry fee, I'm entitled to pull." Rick's face darkened. "The competition is over, I already won." "Competition's not over till everyone who wants to pull has pulled." The announcer cleared his throat. "He's technically correct, Mr. Holloway. Any tractor meeting the horsepower requirement is eligible." Rick looked at the crowd. He could feel the mood shifting, people starting to root for the old man the way crowds always do when the underdog shows up and refuses to go home. He made his calculation. "Fine," Rick said, "let him embarrass himself. After he stalls at the starting line, maybe someone will give him a ride home." He walked back to the announcer's platform, arms crossed, smiling. Howard Pickkins drove the Oliver 88 to the starting line. "Let me tell you about the first pull, because that is when everything started to change." The sled operator looked at the Oliver, shrugged, and hooked the chain. 2,000 people leaned forward to watch a 37-year-old tractor compete with the most advanced farm machine money could buy. The flag dropped. Howard pushed the throttle forward. The Oliver roared, rougher than the 4850, rower, more like a working animal than a precision instrument. Black smoke from the exhaust, rear wheels digging into the dirt. 10 feet 20, 50. "He's actually pulling it," someone said. 100 feet, 150, 200. The crowd was murmuring now, 250, 300, real cheering starting, not polite but genuine. 320, 340, 360 feet. The Oliver's wheels started to spin, the engine screamed, black smoke poured from the stack. 360 feet, the sled beat it. But 360 feet was only 46 feet behind Rick Holloway's all-time record, on a tractor that had been under a canvas tarp for 9 years. The crowd erupted. Howard shut down the engine and climbed off. His face was still calm, but there was something in his eyes. Rick Holloway's smile had disappeared. The rules allowed 2 attempts. Howard had gone 360 on his first pull. To beat Rick's 406, he needed 47 more feet. While Howard examined the track, he noticed something. The first 200 feet were hard-packed and firm, but past that the surface got softer, muddier. The afternoon sun had dried the top layer, but underneath the soil was still wet. Every electronic track. Then he looked at Rick. "Your turn first," Howard said. "Champion pulls last, that's tradition." Rick didn't want to pull again, but the crowd was watching and there was no way to refuse without looking afraid. "Fine," he said, "I'll show you what a real tractor can do. Let me tell you about Rick's second pull, because that is when the $82,000 computer made a decision for him." The flag dropped, the 4850 moved forward just like before, 100 feet, 200, 300, the mud section hit, the wheels started to slip. The traction management sensors detected the slip and reduced power. Rick pushed the throttle harder, the computer overrode him. 320 feet, the machine was bogging down, the temperature gauge climbed, the computer cut power further. 340 feet, wheels spinning freely. 350 feet, the 4850 stopped. Rick had gone 56 feet less than his first pull. The computer had protected the machine from damage perfectly and had cost him the competition. It had decided that protecting the investment was more important than finishing the job. Rick slammed his palm on the steering wheel. He climbed down, walked to the edge of the track, and stood there with his arms crossed. He didn't look at the grandstands. Howard Pickkins climbed onto the Oliver 88 for the second time. "Let me tell you about the next 3 minutes, because they are still the most talked about 3 minutes in Clayton County history." Howard started the engine, drove to the starting line. The crowd was completely silent, 2,000 people holding their breath. The flag dropped. Howard pushed the throttle all the way forward. No sensors to override him, no computer to decide what was safe. No traction management system calculating acceptable risk, just an engine, a transmission, and a man who knew this machine the way you know the sound of your own name. The Oliver roared. 100 feet, old tires throwing arcs of dirt. 200 feet, the crowd already on its feet. 300 feet, the mud section, the same mud that had ended the 4850. The Oliver had no sensors. The wheels spun, mud flew everywhere. The engine screamed at a pitch that seemed impossible for a 37-year-old machine. Howard kept the throttle down, kept demanding every last thing the old machine had. 320 feet, 340, 360, matching his first pull. 370 feet, the crowd was deafening, people jumping, people grabbing strangers, people making sounds that had nothing to do with a tractor pull. 380, 390. Both the sled and the Oliver barely moving now, everything down to inches. 400 feet. The Oliver's engine made a sound, a deep mechanical groan. Howard had never heard from it in 40 years. For 1 second he thought it was over. He thought of his father. He thought of 37 years under a canvas tarp. "This tractor will outlast both of us." Howard kept the throttle down. 401, 402, 403 feet. The sled stopped. The Oliver's wheels spun freely. The pull was over, 403 feet, 3 feet short of Rick Holloway's record. The grandstands produced a sound that people on the county road pulled over to listen to, not knowing what was happening, understanding only that something significant was occurring nearby. 2,000 people on their feet for a 63-year-old man on a 37-year-old tractor who had come within 3 feet of the most advanced machine the county had ever seen. Howard shut down the engine, climbed down on legs that weren't entirely steady, and then he heard something from the track. The sound of wheels spinning in mud and getting nowhere. Rick Holloway's 4850 was stuck. During Rick's second pull, the heavy machine had turned the soft section into something like quicksand ruts 18 inches deep. When Rick tried to drive off the track, the 4850 settled into those ruts and stopped. The wheels spun. The computer cut power. Rick tried again, more spin, more cut. The traction management system was protecting the machine exactly as designed, but in doing so it made escape impossible. The $82,000 John Deere 4850, the most technologically advanced farm tractor money could buy, was stuck in the mud it had created, in front of 2,000 people who had just watched it get beaten by a machine from 1950. Rick climbed down, his face was pale. Get a tow, someone bring a truck. The fair officials looked around. No tow truck at the fairgrounds was heavy enough. The other competitors had already left. Howard Pickkins stood at the edge of the track looking at the stuck 4850, then he looked at his Oliver. I could pull it out, he said. 2,000 people went silent. Rick's face went through several things: confusion, anger, something that might have been fear. You can't be serious, that antique couldn't pull a shopping cart. It just pulled 403 feet of weighted sled. I think it can manage a stuck tractor. The ground's unstable, you'll just get stuck yourself. I know this machine, Howard said. My father knew it before me. I've pulled stumps with it, trucks out of ditches, combines through spring mud. I know what it can do. He climbed onto the Oliver and started the engine. The crowd watched in absolute silence as Howard drove carefully onto the track, reading the ruts, finding the firmer ground between them. He positioned the Oliver behind the stuck 4850 and backed up until the drawbars aligned. A fair official connected the chain between the two machines, the 37-year-old Oliver and the brand-new 4850. Rick Holloway stood at the edge of the track with his arms at his sides, watching his championship tractor about to be rescued by the antique he had mocked in front of 2,000 people. Howard engaged the clutch, the Oliver roared, the old tires found the firmer soil beneath the mud, the chain went taut. For a moment, nothing happened. 8 tons of metal and computer chips sunk in the ruts it had made. The Oliver strained, the mud held, then, slowly, patiently, the way old machines move heavy things, the 4850 began to move. It rolled out of the rut and onto firm ground. The crowd released everything it had been holding. Old farmers who remembered when every tractor was mechanical, when every pull was about skill and knowing your machine, they were weeping. Openly, without embarrassment. Howard unhooked the chain, drove the Oliver off the track and shut down the engine. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. The official results listed Rick Holloway as the 1987 champion. 406 feet beat 403 feet by the rules. Nobody in Clayton County remembered it that way. The Fair Board created a new heritage class that same night for tractors more than 30 years old. Howard Pickkins was named inaugural champion. The trophy was a brass plaque on a piece of oak. It has been in the Pickkins family ever since. Rick Holloway sold the dealership the following spring at a significant loss. People said he couldn't stand the jokes anymore, couldn't walk into the feed store without someone mentioning the time the Oliver pulled him out. The 4850 sold at auction for $60,000, $20 $2,000 less than he had paid. Howard drove the Oliver home and did not put it back under the tarp. He cleaned it, checked the fluids, replaced the Baling wire on the exhaust pipe with a proper clamp. The next spring he started entering tractor shows, not pulls, just shows, where people could look at old machines and talk to the men who kept them running. He would stand beside the Oliver and tell the story of the 1987 fair, and children would climb up onto the seat and grip the steering wheel and pretend to drive. Howard Pickkins died in 2001 at the age of 77. He had farmed until the last year of his life, bringing out the Oliver every August for the heritage class. He won it 14 times, nobody ever beat him. At his funeral, the pallbearers drove tractors, 3 John Deeres and the Oliver, polished and running, carrying the casket from the church to the cemetery. Half the county turned out. His son David came home from Minneapolis and stayed. He took over the farm, learned to maintain the Oliver the way his father and grandfather had, kept the tradition going. In 2005, a Des Moines museum offered $50,000 for the Oliver 88. David turned them down. My grandfather bought this tractor in 1950, he told the representative. He told my father it would outlast both of them. He was right. It outlasted him. It outlasted my father. If I take care of it, it'll outlast me. It belongs somewhere people can appreciate its historical significance. It's not a historical artifact, David said. It's a lesson. Every year when I drive it to the county fair, people remember. They remember that newest and fanciest doesn't always mean best. They remember there's value in keeping old things running, in not throwing away everything that came before just because something shinier comes along. The museum representative left without the tractor. The Oliver 88 is still in the Pickkins barn, still running, still entering the heritage class every August. David's daughter learned to drive it on her 14th birthday, the same age Howard had learned from Earl, the same age Earl had learned from his own father. And somewhere in a Clayton County farmhouse there is a brass plaque on a piece of oak. The inscription reads, Clayton County Fair Heritage Class Champion, Howard Pickkins and his Oliver 88, proof that the old ways still work. Rick Holloway had $82,000 and the most advanced technology John Deere could build. Howard Pickkins had his father's tractor and 40 years of knowing exactly what it could do. When the mud came, the computer gave up. The Oliver kept pulling. That is the difference between a machine that protects itself and a machine that does the job. That is why 35 years later people in Clayton County still tell this story. At the feed store, at the diner, at the fair every August when the heritage class lines up and the old machines start their engines. And the Oliver still runs.